Husband leaves his wife to go with her sister, but days later, something unexpected happens. There are times in life when you make the wrong choice. You just think it's a good thing for you and you don't realize that you're getting into a wolf's mouth, and even if your instincts tell you that you're going in the wrong direction for failure, you move on as if you were a robot, blind with love and admitting and accepting everything many times. However, everything has a limit, and where certain lines are crossed, there's no going back. Treasure this thought as you listen and watch to the next heartbeat and life. Laura and Jack met in college. She was studying philosophy and he was studying law. Both were very young and had a great desire to live, and they met through a mutual friend who introduced them. They were at a party and they couldn't stop looking at each other. When they were finally introduced, sparks flew between them quickly. Shortly after meeting, they began a sentimental relationship, and because they had so much in common, they couldn't bear to be without each other. During the years they spent in college as a couple, the young couple made many plans for the future, had many dreams that they wanted to fulfill together. They often fantasized about being rich and living in a big mansion, having many children and also dogs, and not lacking anything. Especially Jack. He was very ambitious about money and was so obsessed to be rich. Although Laura was very happy with Jack, her parents never really agreed with the relationship. They didn't see Jack as someone good, and they thought that he lacked humility and nobility. The parents tried to warn Laura to be careful with this boy, as they believed that one day he would play her. But Laura was already too in love with Jack to listen to her parents. The relationship of the couple was going great, strengthening, and they couldn't be apart from each other. They were together at all hours, and they shared absolutely everything. They went out together with their friends. They went together to the gym, to the library, shopping, and many other things. They were really a couple that everyone could envy because of the great complicity that they had between them. It was lovely to see them together, and you could tell that they loved each other very much. At least, apparently. After several years together, the long-awaited moment arrived. The couple decided to move in together. After all, they were together all day, but each lived in different rental apartments in the building with their friends or colleagues of the university. They slept every day together, actually one day at Laura's apartment and the other day at Jack's apartment, so they thought it was absurd to be paying rent for 2 apartments. So they looked for a small apartment and both went to live there. Although it wasn't a mansion that they dreamed of, they had to start somewhere. Both were finishing their studies and soon would start working to achieve their dreams. Now the important thing was to be together to achieve it. They decorated their little apartment to their liking, and it soon became to look like a real home. Laura and Jack were increasingly comfortable living together, and there was nothing that could separate them as time went by. The two finished their careers, but only Laura found a good job, since at the university they asked her to stay as a teacher. Instead, Jack wasn't able to find work as a lawyer and had to continue working at Telepizza, where he was when he started his career. Even so, the couple decided to get married and buy a house to renovate. They were a married couple for 7 years, until the unspeakable happened. After 7 years of marriage, Laura was still working in college and earning a lot of money, but she also had little time to spend at home with Jack. Jack, for his part, had had enough of working at Telepizza, and both of them were now living off what Laura was earning. He took care of the house and complained all the time that Laura was ignoring him and not spending time with him, which was true, but nothing would justify what he was about to do. He was being selfish, because if Laura didn't work so hard, they wouldn't have to live or give themselves the life that they have now. One fine day when Laura came home from work, Jack wasn't at home. Laura was surprised because he was always there and had not warned her that he was going out. Laura dropped her things and suddenly saw a piece of paper in the kitchen. She approached, and then she saw that it was a letter from Jack. Without knowing what she was waiting for, she began to read, and suddenly Laura went pale. She couldn't believe what she was reading there. She believed that it was a practical joke because it couldn't be real. Laura couldn't do anything other than start crying uncontrollably, although she still had in her mind that the idea might be just a joke and that Jack would still appear at any moment, maybe cover her eyes and say, "It was a joke," or something like that. She didn't believe it, however, as the minutes passed. She understood that it was true. The letter began as saying, "Dear wife," and her husband, after 7 years of marriage and many others as a boyfriend, was breaking up their marriage through a letter. He didn't even have the courage to speak to her in person and just walked away from her. But there was still something much worse. Laura, with all the pain in her heart, continued reading the letter as best as she could. Her eyes flooded with tears, and she managed to read something that made her even worse than she already was. Laura couldn't believe anything she was reading. It all happened suddenly without warning, and above all, through a letter. Jack couldn't have been more inconsiderate, and he even confessed that he was leaving her because he had started a relationship with nothing more and nothing less than Laura's sister. Poor Laura was on the verge of an anxiety attack. It couldn't be true. She didn't want to believe it. Laura had to sit in a chair because she was getting dizzy at the time. Her sister had always gotten along very well with her husband, but she believed it was only a good relationship between brother-in-law. It had never crossed her mind that something might be happening between them. She couldn't take the hard blow her husband and sister were giving her at the same time. The feeling she had in her body was horrible, and she ran to pick up the phone to call Jack. This has to be a joke, she told herself. Laura picked up the phone and called Jack. However, his phone was off. She instantly called her sister, and it was off as well. Laura called her parents to see if they knew anything about her sister, but they didn't know anything, and also they got very concerned when they heard how upset Laura was. In the letter, they told her not to try to contact them because they had eloped together, that their lawyers had already had the divorce papers ready for her to sign. Laura went crazy at that moment. She ran upstairs to see if Jack's clothes were in the cabinets, but everything was empty. He had taken all his things and even some of Laura's things, and above all, part of her money. Jack had taken half of the money in their accounts that they both had in common. Since they were married and shared property, he claimed that the money belonged to him, even though he hadn't earned or contributed towards it. Laura was totally devastated. There was no way to mitigate her pain. Not only had her husband suddenly betrayed him, but her own sister had also done it. This was something that exceeded the limits of understanding of Laura, and I believe of any human being. She couldn't understand how and when it happened. She certainly had been so immersed in her work that she hadn't realised it. She wondered as she tried to take a deep breath so as not to cry again. But she was doing everything for Jack. He didn't work and he wanted to live rich without doing anything. So Laura had to work twice as hard. That had been the reason why she hadn't been able to be with him always. The following days were very hard for Laura, trying to assimilate everything. She didn't want to ask for a leave because she needed to work to clear her mind and not to think about everything that had happened, but she really was fatal. She had not heard from her husband or sister yet, and she was trying to digest what had happened and if it was real. And she only had to resign herself, accept it, and make her life and continue ahead. Now Laura had had enough time to think, and for several days she was crying, thinking about how could this have happened, recalling moments together and also looking at photos. The two had been together for many years and had experienced many things. Laura didn't understand how she didn't even deserve an explanation in person, and how well she'd always been with him. Little by little, the sadness transformed into something else. Laura was a very calm and peaceful person, but what they had done to her had no name. Her feelings began to change, and she gradually replaced her sadness with anger. How were they so cowardly to leave her such a cold letter like that? It was completely absurd, as if they were two small children playing. Things shouldn't be done that way. Laura felt that they'd laughed at her in her face, and on top of that, she didn't even deserve an explanation. But what she didn't know was that life was about to give her an opportunity in a way that someone could least imagine. Every time Laura read that stupid letter, she got more and more angry. What a shame it is to leave your wife after so many years with a simple piece of paper. How cowardly and creeping he'd been, but things weren't always going to stay that way at all. The day Laura came home and found the letter, she had great news to tell Jack, but he never gave her the chance to do it. She couldn't. Now that news would be the best letter for her to draw up a plan of revenge. When Laura could gather enough strength, she called the lawyer they had, and indeed, Jack had left instructions for a divorce. Laura told him that she was fine, but that he wasn't going to be the one to take her part as well. Laura found another lawyer and put the story on the table. It wasn't going to be like that, much less it wasn't going to be easy for Jack. The revenge was in process. Laura exposed everything that had happened to her new lawyer, and it was all clear. Jack had done something illegal, which was to take half the money without having divorced yet. In addition, leaving your wife by letter is reportable and provides legal benefits to the person left behind. Ultimately, when the case went to trial, Laura would win it, and in addition, Jack would have to return the money that he had taken and even pay compensation to Laura. The play had gone very wrong for Jack. When Laura's lawyer contacted Jack and told him everything, Jack panicked. He couldn't believe that he'd have to return the money and also pay compensation. Jack and Laura's sister were planning to live with her money until they found something from then to now, and they were broke and in debt because they had nothing. Jack was a person obsessed with money, and this hit him hard. He started to regret what he had done, but when he found out the following, he regretted it even more. They were finally legally divorced. Laura got her money back, and Jack owed her a debt. Jack and Laura's sister were having a really bad time, and both had to find sporadic jobs to survive, and above all, pay Laura's debt. The best of all came when Laura finally broke the news that she'd been keeping to herself for all that time, and which, that day Jack had left her the letter, she had been willing to tell him. She had won the lottery. That was the news that Jack had never heard. Laura was now immensely rich. She had won the Euro $1 million jackpot, nothing more and nothing less than 30 million euros. When Jack found out about this, the world fell on him. It was the dream that Laura and he had always had, and now she had achieved it. Of course, Laura kept this news to herself until they were legally divorced, in case the trial didn't go well, and so not to have to give Jack a single euro. He was in such pain for the money that he even tried to get back with her, but it was too late. Jack and Laura's sister lived with what was fair and suffered a lot of needs. In addition, for this they spent their time fighting day and night. For her part, Laura wrote a final letter to Jack. Dear ex-husband, I hope that the life you have with my sister is the one you always dreamed of, or the one you told me about whilst the two of us were in bed. For my part, I have fulfilled that dream. What a pity that you left the day I was going to give you the news. I want you to know that I'm immensely happy. I have quit my job and I have met someone very special. We're enjoying life as you and I always wanted it, and I have money to live 7 more lives. With love, your ex-wife. Wow, how incredible, friends. But this story really captures before our eyes and ears that many times we go after the wrong wishes. Many times our ambitions will lead us to make a bad decision in life. What a great lesson this man received. I really have been left with that taste of satisfaction after Jack and Laura's sister got what they deserved. We must always be patient and not hasty. Let's make things happen because we plan it and not by chance, or because we're carried away by feelings. What do you think about this story? Let us know in the comments section.